Somewhere in Ward 4W were explosions and mayhem and screams, but they were soundless, confined to the patient's troubled dreams, which grew in vividness even as sleep itself began to ebb. These moments before consciousness, when the viewer is aware only of what he views, an eye without an eye, were filled by a series of images, each of which buckled like a film strip stopped before an overheated projector bulb. A political rally on a steamy day in Taiwan, thousands of citizens assembled in a large square, cooled only by the very occasional breeze. A political candidate struck down in mid-sentence by a blast. Small, contained, deadly. Moments before he had been speaking eloquently, ardently. Now he was sprawled on the wooden rostrum in a cowl of his own blood. He lifted up his head, gazing out at the crowd one final time, and his eyes settled on one member of the crowd. A Chang Bizi, a Westerner. The one person who was not screaming, crying, fleeing. The one person who did not seem surprised. For he was, after all, in the presence of his own handiwork. The candidate died staring at the one who had come from across the world to kill him. Then the image buckled, shimmied, burned into a blinding white. A far-off chime from an unseen speaker, a minor key triad, and Hal Ambler opened his sleep-sticky eyes. Was it truly morning? In his windowless room he had no way of telling, but it was his morning. Recessed into the ceiling, soft fluorescent lights grew in intensity over a half-hour period. A technological dawn made brighter by the whiteness of his surroundings. A pretend day, at least, was beginning. Ambler's room was 9 feet by 12 feet. The floors were tiled with white vinyl and the walls were covered with white PVC foam, a dense, rubbery material slightly yielding to the touch like a wrestling mat. Before long, the hatch-style door would slide open, making a hydraulic sigh as it did. He knew these details and hundreds like them. It was the stuff of life in a high-security facility, if you could call it a life. He experienced stretches of grim lucidity, intervals of a fugue state, a larger sense that he had been abducted, not just his body, but also his soul. In the course of a nearly 2-decade career as a clandestine operative, Ambler had occasionally been taken captive. It had happened in Chechnya and in Algeria, and he had been subjected to periods of solitary confinement. He knew that the circumstance wasn't conducive to deep thoughts, soul-searching, or philosophical inquiry. Rather, the mind filled with scraps of advertising jingles, pop songs with half-remembered lyrics, and an acute consciousness of small bodily discomforts. It eddied, drifted, and seldom went anywhere interesting, for it was ultimately tethered to the curious agony of isolation. Those who had trained him for the life of an operative had tried to prepare him for such eventualities. The challenge, they had always insisted, was to keep the mind from attacking itself, like a stomach digesting its own lining. Yet on Parrish Island, he wasn't in the hands of his enemies. He was being held by his own government, the government in whose service he had spent his career, and he did not know why. Why someone might be interned here wasn't a mystery to him. As a member of the branch of U.S. intelligence known as Consular Operations, he had heard about the facility on Parrish Island. Ambler understood, too, why such a facility had to exist. Everyone was susceptible to the frailties of the human mind, including those in possession of highly guarded secrets. But it was dangerous to allow just any psychiatrist access to such a patient. That was a lesson learned the hard way, during the Cold War, when a Berlin-born psychoanalyst in Alexandria, whose clientele included several top government officials, came to be exposed as a conduit to East Germany's notorious Ministerium für Staatssicherheit. Yet none of this explained why Hal Ambler found himself here ever since... How long had it been? His training had stressed the importance of keeping track of time when in confinement, Somehow he had failed to do so, and his questions about duration went unanswered. Had it been 6 months? A year? More? There was so much he did not know. One thing he did know was that if he did not escape soon, he really would go mad.